What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Gladiator 2, the new epic historical action film from Ridley Scott. Of course, this is 24 years in the making, the follow-up to 2000's Gladiator, one of the biggest blockbuster movies of recent times, kind of the last vestige of old school traditional Hollywood filmmaking before the dawn of CGI. Of course, that film, a rousing success, wins Best Picture. A sequel to Gladiator had been in various stages of development over the past 24 years, but now we're finally here with an actual sequel. Ridley Scott back in the director's chair, David Scarpa writing the screenplay, having just worked with Ridley Scott on Napoleon. Also, cinematographer John Matheson is back for the sequel. I liked Gladiator 2 a lot. Now, this is clearly a legacy sequel and by definition really doesn't compare at all to its predecessor, but I had a great time watching Gladiator 2. There are some tremendous performances in this movie. Chief among them is Denzel Washington, who steals the show as Macrinus. Paul Mescal does not have quite the gravitas that Russell Crowe has. Few actors do, but he does do a good job playing a different type of character. And I think the differences that Gladiator 2 has is what actually surprised me most about this movie. There's a lot of structural similarities, but there was a lot of surprise for me as well in this movie that I wasn't expecting having seen the trailer. I thought the trailer was going to give away more than it ends up doing. Some of the emotional moments, the various plot mechanics have up and down effectiveness in Gladiator 2. This is not as tight and as masterful of a movie as the first. Now we think about the very premise of Gladiator getting a sequel. Of course it was going to be at least somewhat differently because of course Russell Crowe's Maximus dies at the end of the first Gladiator, an iconic moment, iconic end for an iconic character, right? And now we've traveled about 16, I think, years in the future, as they say. We're now under the rule of twin brother emperors, Gaeta and Caracalla, played by Joseph Quinn and Fred Hetchinger, and we've kind of descended into the familiar late Roman period where Rome is, characterized by excess and never-ending violence and war, both in the games and overseas, and there's growing, public unrest and whatnot. We're long past the five great emperors period, which of course ends with Marcus Aurelius, who meets his end at the beginning of the first Gladiator movie. Our central character in Gladiator 2 is Lucius, played by Paul Mescal. Of course, Lucius is the young blonde boy with the bowl cut in the first Gladiator movie. A small character, to be sure. Lucilla, played by Connie Nielsen, who is also back in this movie. In fact, the only two actors that are returning from the first movie are Connie Nielsen and also Derek Jacobi as Gracchus, one of the Roman senators. It was kind of clever to use Lucius as the way back into this world and this story in terms of having some kind of through line. It makes sense that he would be sent away following the deaths of Maximus and Commodus because his existence was a threat to other people's desire for the throne. It makes a lot of sense. And if you think about what's happened in Roman history, in the lead up to this point where the movie takes place, we're now in a new dynastic family ruling Rome. So Lucius's claim to the throne, that he is of course renounced, is very tenuous. But anyway, I think that origin makes sense. It is an interesting juxtaposition though, right? Because Maximus was to be bestowed the title of emperor by Marcus Aurelius, foregoing the, line and of course ensuing Commodus's wrath, as we know, kicking off the first movie. Whereas Paul Mescal is actually like the Prince of Rome. He actually has a claim to the throne. It's kind of different. And of course, keeping that theme, Maximus is a natural leader. He's literally a general of the Roman army. And Lucius is just a kind of a loner drifter who has gone off and made his own life in spite of his Roman upbringing. So they're different characters is the point. So to me, I can forgive the fact that Paul Mescal is not quite as seen stealing and carrying all this gravitas the way Russell Crowe does, because they're playing two different types of characters. That being said, towards the end of the movie, where Lucius has to speechify a bit, he doesn't do it to the same strength as Russell Crowe does, unsurprisingly. But I think to his credit, I enjoyed Paul Mescal in the movie because he does have a presence. He does certainly has a physicality when it comes to the Colosseum scenes and the violence in the movie. And in general, I think Lucius, his portrayal of Lucius is pretty good in the movie, given what the material is and what the character is. We know Paul Mescal can be quite charismatic. He is a very charming person in real life in terms of what we see, publicly as him as a celebrity and in other films. And I was really excited that he was cast in this movie because, I mean, the superstar rise of Paul Mescal ever since The Normal People breakout in 2020 has been amazing to watch. And he was a great choice for this role. I think, just if anything, the role of Lucius required some stoicism that just makes it a less flashy performance than Crow gets to give as Maximus. In terms of the structural similarities, again, there's a lot of, especially early days stuff, right, where you have Lucius gets enslaved by the Roman army, gets purchased by a gladiator, manager, slave owner, right? And he starts training it to be a gladiator and return to Rome and fight in the Colosseum. A lot of similarities to what happens in the beginning of Gladiator, right? So much so that the gladiator trainer slash owner, Oliver Reed's Proximo in the first movie, it's now Denzel Washington's Macrinus in the second movie. Both Maximus and Lucius have other gladiators that you recognize and follow them throughout the course of the film. Much like the first movie, Lucius is accompanied by a very tall gladiator who's just completely jacked once again. And for me, the biggest surprise, like going into the movie, having seen the trailer, and the lead up to it, I was like, so what is like where does the similarities continue to take us, right? Because like you think about the first movie, it ends with this final confrontation between Maximus and Maximus versus Commodus, and Commodus's wish but inability to have Maximus killed for fear of making him a martyr. Like that central conflict, and in terms of Maximus's family feeling his desires to continue to fight, all that's like really easy to discern in such a triumph in the first movie, right? When you watch the trailer for Gladiator 2, you're like, huh, is Pedro Pascal's Roman general Acacius character, is that the actual villain? Because in the trailer you see them fighting in the Colosseum, like, oh, is that the build up to it? And how do the emperors kind of fade into that? What is Denzel Washington's role? Of course, Denzel Washington, one of the greatest actors of all time. He's not going to just take any role at this point. He's not even that much of not active an actor anymore. So, what is his part to play in this? And what surprised me about it is that we learn very early on that Acacius, Pedro Pascal's character, isn't actually much of an antagonist at all. Despite his early introduction in the film, where we see his Roman campaign in Numidia, which results in the death of Lucius's wife and his enslavement. Despite all that, he's actually good. Acacius is married to Kai Nielsen's Lucilla, Lucius's mom, and they both have this desire to return Rome to its former glory in terms of serving its citizens and not just being this bloodthirsty, violent, bacchanalian excess. They invoke, and not for the last time in the movie, Marcus Aurelius' original dream, right? His dream to maintain, the good of Rome, the dream of Rome. That's, alluded to in the beginning of the movie before Commodus starts, acting a fool. I found that, like, premise pretty compelling, especially because it ultimately leads to an earlier than expected confrontation between Acacius and Lucius, who's going by Hanno in the movie until we learn his true identity. Hanno and Acacius fighting, but not really wanting to fight, especially on Acacius' part, and then Acacius being killed at the behest of the emperors when his treachery to the emperors is exposed by a treacherous Macrinus. He's like, oh, then the movie starts to fall into place. And that's where the movie changes, right? Because Proximo in the first Gladiator, this big sacrifice, right? He saves Maximus alongside most of his gladiators, right? He makes the ultimate sacrifice. He's good. But Macrinus is actually the true villain of the movie, and his quest for revenge against Rome, having been a former slave himself, a slave to Marcus Aurelius specifically, that is kind of been replaced with this ill-begotten, unimaginable, unconquestable, like lust for power. So as a result, there's no actual like final confrontation in the Colosseum the way you get with Maximus and Commodus. What you actually have is this confrontation outside the walls of Rome on the battlefield as the various factions of the Roman army are watching, and we try and basically learn the fate of what's to come. And again, to get to that point, that means that both of the emperors, Geta and Caracalla, are taken off the board a little earlier than you'd expect. In particular, Macrinus arranges the death of Joseph Quinn's Geta, who was the more capable emperor of the two brothers, and then knowing he can manipulate Caracalla, who is seemingly having mental illness due to the effects of syphilis, it seems. So as a result, like, Denzel is really the star of this movie in many respects because he gets to certainly chew the most scenery and have the most fun in the movie. He is not stoic the way Paul Mescal's Hanno Lucius is, right? And yeah, it kind of surprised me. I wasn't expecting the movie to quite go down that road. Now, in terms of where Gladiator 2 gets tripped up and comes up a bit short, especially when you compare it to its predecessor, which isn't completely fair, but it's a named sequel, so it's going to happen. I think the emotional elements that were so central to the first movie, namely Maximus's, lust for revenge against his murdered, family and whatnot, right? Like, and he's clearly being someone who's good, but also someone who immediately motivates everyone to fight for him, and you as a viewer, you're like completely on board, right? That again, Lucius being a different type of character, that is not quite present in this movie, and when they start to change Lucius's motivations to want to be more of a uh, fighter for all, it comes across a bit abrupt. Also, I think Kai Nielsen's Lucilla is not the most compelling character, honestly, and she's given kind of a lot to carry emotionally, dramatically in this movie, especially in the second half. And I just don't know if it completely lands. You're just not quite as invested in this, and frankly, the reveal about the other side of Lucius's parentage. People are unsure. Lucilla rumored to have taken many lovers at the time. We believe revoking the advances of her brother Commodus, but who is the actual dad? Turns out the dad is actually Maximus himself. So Lucius is also the son of Maximus, in addition to being the nephew of Commodus, and thus actually in line for the throne. And that's not something that like surprised me per se. I was completely like open to that idea, but I don't know if it necessarily lands with like any extra impact the way I think they want it to. Gladiator 2 is also existing during a time when CGI is a necessary evil at worst, also a great tool at best when it comes to blockbuster filmmaking. So as a result, the combat sequences, the big set pieces of this movie, are staged in a different way than they were in the first one, which was almost entirely practical. This case, which, and a lot of this unfortunately was in the trailer, too much for my taste, but a lot of the big set pieces involve some kind of CG. The early fight outside of Rome, mini Colosseum fight where Lucius has to fight it off against a bunch of baboons, all CGI. His first fight in the Colosseum is against this undefeated gladiator who's standing atop a CGI rhinoceros. And of course, the second big showstopper, a flooding of the Colosseum, which was an amazing set piece that they did. I thought that was super cool, but it involves CGI sharks swimming throughout the Colosseum. And when you think about these like moments compared to their predecessors, their analogs in the first movie, I think about like the first scene of Maximus in the Colosseum proper in Rome, where he fights what was the guy's name, like Tigris of Gaul or something, the guy with the tiger mask all armored up and stuff. An amazing fight. I think the rhino fight's still pretty good, but like watching Mescal dive out of the way of a not real rhinoceros isn't quite as dramatic. I liked the ship fight with the flooded Colosseum fine, but I think having CGI sharks and like a lot of them, and also the fact that like that's probably the most egregious thing historically accuracy wise. Like, there's no chance the Romans captured sharks, let alone that many, and then transported them that far inland to flood the Colosseum. Like, it's just not. It takes you out, in my opinion. It just looks so unreal, But it's super cool to be with a flooded Colosseum. I wish that moment was a complete surprise, to be honest. But that thing is, of course, in the trailer. And then, of course, you have like the final fight outside the gates between Macrinus and Lucius, which I think was pretty good. I actually liked that fight. I thought Denzel was credible in the battle against Lucius. Of course, he loses, but like, despite the fact that he's a lot older as a character. I think it still worked pretty well. I love how like they started to fight in the stream and stuff, and he was like kicking embers and stuff. I thought it was a good fight. So like in conclusion, like I think these are all good set pieces, but none of them are as tremendous as what you get in the first film. And again, just kind of speaks to the strength of practical effects and the gravitas of that kind of filmmaking can carry. If anything, though, most disappointing to me, and again, like I'm saying, disappointing in quotes, I really did enjoy the movie for what it is, despite recognizing these faults. Like, I would have loved a greater confrontation between Lucius and the Emperors, particularly Emperor Gaeta, played by Joseph Quinn. Arguably, the best set piece in the movie is this fight between Lucius and this other, gladiator, but it's not in the Colosseum. It's this hand-to-hand brawl in the middle of this Roman party inside this mansion of one of the senators, and it's watched by all the characters. The emperors are there. They're having a rhinoceros feast, shaving off rhino horn. Like I thought that scene worked completely, and then having this really physical fight in that moment was sick, honestly, because you felt the punch, you felt the weight of that violence, that hand to hand combat, the way we think of movies like John Wick or Mission Impossible or something. Like that was like you felt that combat, that was real. And then watching like Joseph Quinn and Fred Hetchinger like eat it up, from just a short distance away. Like I would have loved to see more stuff like that. That was so cool. Also, the fight, however brief, between Acacius and Lucius when they have to fight unwittingly, I think that was really good. Even the early battle in Numidia, which is northern Africa, like modern day like Tunisia, Libya ish area, like thought that fight was good. Pedro Pascal, unsurprisingly, incredibly capable in combat and in an arena. Of course, making his name as Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper on Game of Thrones. We know he can fucking hang in a combat sequence, and it was so great to see him do it once again. In terms of the Emperors and what we do get from them, Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal as Commodus was an instant classic as soon as we got it, especially coming at the time it did. Joaquin's still on his like rise to superstardom, getting an Oscar nomination for that role. Tremendous stuff, incredibly villainous, right? But also such a scene stealer. I think Quinn does a really nice job as Gaeta. I liked him quite a bit, and Joseph Quinn is someone who, the stock is at an all-time high at this point, right? Just in such a short amount of time, kind of like Paul Mescal, right? Joseph Quinn is just rocketed up into the A-list with Stranger Things, into Quiet Place Day 1, to Gladiator 2, and now we're going to get him in Fantastic Four, and he's also apparently going to be George Harrison in the Sam Mendes Beatles movies. Like, shout out Joseph Quinn, he's crushing it, and he's really good. I think he's charismatic in the role as Gaeta, and kind of has a bit of the Commodus lean in the performance, and like he's intelligent but also kind of manic, and makes sense for how we're kind of being told about how Rome is existing in this time. The Fred Hetchinger performance I liked less. Fred Hetchinger, probably best known for White Lotus season 1. We just saw him in Nickel Boys. He's a rising actor as well, though not on the degree of Quinn or Mescal for sure. His performance is a bit more one note, but like he's having fun with the performance because he gets to play someone manic. He's someone who's deranged from syphilis, right? So it makes sense. And I was kind of disappointed though when Macronus like gets Caracalla to kill Gaeta, because I was like, oh wait, that's it for Joseph Quinn? I was loving Joseph Quinn in the movie, and we spend more time with Caracalla as a result before he also meets his end. But I was like, I know this performance. Like, I know what's going on. He's being manipulated. He's one note. There's not much more under the hood with that Hetchinger performance, because that's the material. I would have loved more Joseph Quinn. I would have loved another scene. Just even give me like really one one with Lucius and Gaeta would have been nice. Also, I think in terms of talking about the emotion of the film and how it doesn't quite land, and the other piece of that is we're told a lot about how like Rome is not well anymore, and the people are hungry and there's unrest and stuff. But like every time we see bits of Rome and anything outside the Colosseum, everything seems alive, well and good. It doesn't look that different from the first movie. Then when we get to the riots at the end, because the people seemingly are rejecting the death of Acacius and the death of Lucilla as well, it feels like it's a bit of a show don't tell situation, where it's like I just didn't quite feel the work was done enough to communicate the differences in the circumstances, and like even like the Senate politicking in this movie, which is I think a really strong like third plot line in the first Gladiator. Senate politicking. You have this one guy who gets over leveraged gambling wise to Denzel's macromus, and which this leads to all the betrayals and whatnot. His character, I think, is nice and a fun addition for what he is. But Gracchus coming back, Derek Jacobi coming back, doesn't really have a whole lot beyond that one scene. And again, like the whole like Senate, I guess the Senate is becoming a bunch of sycophants, and Macronus gets to like waltz into power. Like I guess I was like a little bit more on that side of things too, just because it doesn't feel like Rome was sufficiently colored in enough to then have the movie end with all this like big upheaval. You're not quite as invested in like the chain of events because I just don't think the ground was completely settled yet. Also, I'd be remiss not to talk about what I think will go down as one of the great Hollywood casting what ifs in recent memory, which was that Barry Keoghan was supposed to be Emperor Caracalla in this movie. He was officially cast in the role, then had to drop out due to scheduling conflicts, leading to Fred Hetchinger replacing him. Man, that is a bummer. Again, no shots at Fred Hetchinger. He's a nice actor. But like Barry Keoghan, that's someone on the level of Joseph Quinn and Paul Mescal. That would have been insane. And I would have loved to see Quinn and Keoghan play off each other. That to me, I don't want to call it a miss, just because the character is what the character is. Caracalla is a bit more one note. I think Barry would have added more texture and surprise to that character and that performance. So, bit of a bummer. So yeah, in conclusion, I liked Gladiator 2 quite a bit. I feel like I harped on a lot of the problems. That's because I hold a movie to a really high bar. I still think it's a really rollicking good time, and unlike most blockbusters you get without a shadow of a doubt, like there's few movies working on this level. And once again, hats off to Sir Ridley Scott, who turns 87 years old in a week's time. This guy is a beast. He is incredibly awe-inspiring with his work ethic despite his age. And that is not stopping. He's shooting 2 movies next year. Uh, the adaptation of the sci-fi novel, what is it called? The Dog Days, the Dog Stars. He's shooting the Dog Stars in April and that Bee Gees movie in September. So he has not originally, recently alluded to a Gladiator 3 idea in the works, but I mean, that movie can't even shoot until 2026, so it's not really spend too much time thinking about that given where Ridley is at life. But man, what a what a legend. Like he just continues to work, and even though his movies, not all of them are spectacular, at this late period of his career, everything is interesting. Everything has a ton of craft, and even the things that maybe don't work quite as well or have polarizing elements, like a House of Gucci, like a Napoleon, there's still a lot of worthy things about them, and all these movies are worth seeing. What a way to cap a career, the way he's continuing to move. So really exciting. Gladiator 2, it sounds like the box office is going to be pretty strong. It's not going to be on Wicked levels, but as a result, we're going to have a massive box office weekend, and this whole like end of the November corridor with Moana 2 about to come out as well. Times are good at the movies, and we'll see about Oscar attention. I'm not sure if this movie quite has the full legs to totally get there. I think there was a lot more confidence about that before people started seeing the movie. I think maybe some of the warts might hold Gladiator 2 back in that regard. We'll find out. But yeah, let me know. What did you think of Gladiator 2? What was your favorite moment about it? And for more movie reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time.